Hello, welcome to Cover to Cover, our semi-regular review of sporting books where I give you my opinion of what's on the bookshelves at the moment. You can see many of the books that we've reviewed on the shelves behind us, and if you've got a book you'd like us to review, we would love to hear from you. Indeed, if you'd like to report back on anything that I've said about some of those books, we'd also love to hear from you, good or bad. Don't forget, there's the email address, sean.everett@supersport.com. Okay, let's crack on with today's book. Here it is, Lions in Africa, 130 Years of Rugby Rivalry, published by Flyleaf, written by Chris Scummon and David McLennan, in your books shops now at £320, also available, of course, from all the regular online sites. If you're technologically challenged, like some of my family, then just find a child or a grandchild to Google it for you. It really is not difficult, I promise you. Chris Scummon is a veteran rugby writer. He's got a plethora of books in his back catalogue, including biographies of the great Dani Gerber and Frick de Preer. David McLennan is a rare book dealer in Cape Town, and this is the third combined effort between these two authors. They've also done histories of both Newlands and Ellis Park. Well, this is one of several books published in time for the Lions tour, which will sadly perhaps miss those extra sales that the hoped-for influx of Lions supporters to this country would have brought. We've reviewed two excellent ones on Cover to Cover, Ya Near, which is just behind me here, and This Is Your Everest. And those two books are, of course, very specific. This Is Your Everest deals with the 1997 tour, and Ya Near with just the second test match of the 1974 tour. By contrast, Lions in Africa covers the contests all the way from 1891 to 2009, casting its net as wide as possible. Inevitably then, my biggest criticism of the book is a lack of detail, particularly as it seems that it's intended as a reference work. Between 1891 and 1955, we learn much about how the team travelled between games, the functions that they attended, and the quality or otherwise of the surfaces on which they played. But there is no list of results. That only happens from the 1962 tour onwards, and yet a quick trip to Wikipedia reveals the result of every game of every tour, complete with the test lineups and scorers. For the most part, of course, the results are contained within the text, but that shines a spotlight on the other principal problem I have with the book, the rather soulless description of key moments. Comparisons are, of course, odious, but in Ya Near, a sense of place and a point in time are always palpable. In Lions in Africa, we have far too much of who scored in which minute and far too little of why it mattered. The second test of the 1974 series, for instance, which Ya Near devotes an entire book to, is dismissed in one paragraph. The closest we come to description is Phil Bennett's try, which the authors concede was truly marvellous. The issue is one of repetition without interrogation. We're told several times, for instance, that the great Irish centre Mike Gibson became the first substitute in international rugby in the first test of the 68 tour. But we don't get any kind of delve into how that came about. And that despite the fact that the book mentions numerous instances of teams being reduced to 14 or even 13 players prior to 1968 because substitutes were not allowed. Well, equally, the opportunity to compare the game of rugby union that we know today with the game played at the end of the 19th century is ignored. We have an evocative photograph of the 1891 tourists playing in the shade of Table Mountain against the Cape Colony. Men in long trousers, standing groups, watched by a large crowd, and the contrast with the coloured action photos of the 1997 series in the same insert could not be more starkly descriptive of the fact that the two sides are playing an entirely different game, but both called rugby union. With all that said, Lions in Africa is still an important book. For one thing, it devotes much time and effort to the very first tours, pointing out that calling the first two a Lions tour at all is in question, since 1891 featured 17 Englishmen and 4 Scotsmen, and 1896 was a blend of English and Irish players. It wasn't in fact until 1903 that the team could justify calling itself a British Isles selection at all. South Africa's first 2 wins in international rugby both came against the Lions. Newlands 1896, Newlands 1903. On both occasions, because of their captain Barry Heatley, they wore the bottle green jerseys of the old Diocesans Club, and that of course led directly to the green and gold strip of today's Springboks. The second win was the more significant because it clinched the series. The first two tests both ended in draws, one of which is one of the rare instances in rugby history of 0-0 in a test match. The point is well made that the game in South Africa really only solidified at the end of the Boer War in May 1902 for obvious reasons. Once it did solidify, of course, it became arguably the best rugby played anywhere in the Commonwealth. And when Willie John McBride's Invincibles of 1974 won the series 3-0 with one drawn, 78 years and 7 tours had passed since the last series win by the Lions in 1896. Some of the best moments in the book concern the 1955 tour, when the great Welsh fly half Cliff Morgan inspired a generation of South African players with his flamboyant approach to the game. I remember Hugh Bladen telling me that as a very young lad in shorts, he watched Cliff Morgan and it made him want to be a fly half. Extracts from Cliff's autobiography give a great feel for the era. There's more detail as the book comes up to date, thanks in no small measure to the amount of literature available on the subject, of which I'm pleased to say there's a fine bibliography at the end for those who want to delve further. Right, so how to sum up Lions in Africa? Every tour is well documented. The illustrations are well chosen. There's even an intriguing foreword to the book, one by Willie John McBride, one by Hannes Murray. But it's what's known in the trade as a bit of a Dutch breakfast because somehow it just misses the boat. And for that reason, I can only give it 4 out of 10. Well, that's it for this week. Let me leave you with a stat from the book that will put the modern game into perspective. According to the Rand Daily Mail, the 1910 Lions team had an average age of 23 and an average weight of 80 kilograms. Now, that was 3 kilos heavier than their South African counterparts, by the way. Now, when the first test match of this year's Lions tour was announced, the two smallest players on the field for South Africa were Faf de Klerk and Cheslin Colby. And what do you think they weighed? 80 kilos.